thank you everyone for showing up at 2 p.m. Utaita? Ila? No? Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's a hard act to follow after crime fiction and talking about gripping the edge of your seat and nail-biting tension and all that. So I hope you'll relax in this session because we're talking about nature and wildlife and conservation. So I'm wearing two hats this afternoon. I'm both the co-author of one book as well as the moderator of this session. And we have young Ishan Shanavas with a book called The Light of Wilder Things, and Rom's Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, of which he had a corny, if I might say so, corny promo video. The interesting thing about this session, I thought, was they are both coming of age books. They are both about very young people finding their way through nature to... Oh, okay. Is this better? Okay. So I was saying that this is an interesting session because there are two books which are coming of age stories of two young men who find themselves through nature by exploring their interest for wildlife, wilderness. And some of the stories are truly extraordinary. And it's also interesting that these stories are separated by decades. So we have Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll set in the 50s and 60s, and Shanavas' book, which is in the 90s and the noughties. So so it's great to moderate this session. But I wanted to ask you, Ishan, why wilder things, like wilder?
You know, this is a funny story. The title of the book came to me when I was just driving through Tamil Nadu, and I thought the syllables fell very nicely, The Light of Wilder Things. But my editor thought it should be The Light of Wild Things, and so we waged a battle over which title to choose, and I think that's one of the few battles that I won with him, and therefore I just thought the semantics worked better with The Light of Wilder Things.
Cool. Now I lost my thought. Yeah, it's one thing to look back on your life after you've lived most of it, like Rom has, and then to write a book. And another thing to... Well, I'm his wife. I can say what I want. But another thing to write it when you're barely 21. How did you think that you were at the right stage in your life to reflect upon where your journey until then?
So, I think in many ways, this book has been a long time in the making. I grew up and I grew interested in this space by reading books like those written by people like Rom Sir and so many others reflecting over decades of experience. What I noticed was that while those books are very important, I thought we also needed something that was more current and reflective of where nature is right now. And in that I had a sort of nested interest to cater to younger readers, where I thought they should read something by someone who's just a few years ahead. And so that's why I try to keep the book as digestible as possible. And I try to write it, and I try to write about the context that we are all living in. We're not living at a time where there's forests just 30 kilometers from Bangalore, but where there are forests that you have to drive 200 kilometers to reach. This is the world that we currently live in, and that's something that I thought younger readers would resonate with better. So that's why I decided. As for how I actually got to write the book, I have been keeping a journal of my nature escapades, if you will, for as long as I can remember. But one day when I was 19 years old, my dad came to my room and he said, Ishan, I think you should write a book on it. And he just left the room. Right? And I just sat there thinking, what a good idea. And so I just brain vomited words onto a document that day, which has now resulted in what we have here today. Right.
Cool. But do we have to wait another 10 years for you to come out with the next book?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Or maybe sooner. Stay tuned to find out.
Okay, so it's very hard for me as a co-author as well as his wife to be doing this session, asking him questions, because all day long I'm going, why did you do that? So now I have to find questions even I don't know the answer to. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Rom, is why an autobiography and why not a memoir? By that I mean an autobiography deals with everything in your life, like the squabbles you had with your siblings, your mother's life outside of being a parent. And I'm thinking especially of your mother, because she was such a private person. Would she have approved of you talking about the family?
We should have rehearsed this before. My wonderful mother was the weirdest, the weirdest mother you could imagine. She said, I brought a snake home, and she said, wow, how gorgeous. What mother would say that? I mean, is she nuts? But it was wonderful because it was kick-started what I became and what I'm doing to this day. I think she would have reveled in the fact that people are interested in what I was always obsessed by, but they were interested in a positive way, simply because they see this freak, this this Whitaker guy, holding snakes and teaching kids how to love snakes. Love snakes? I mean, that just doesn't sort of compute, does it? But it does, it really does. And this is a sort of doorway into natural history or into the wild. And what could be a better one than a creature which is so maligned and so misunderstood? So I think she'd be very happy.
I'm going to push back on that, because you didn't just write about snakes, you wrote about the family.
That's true. I think I've said almost everything that I've said about my family has been very positive. Others, they would beat me. So, no, what were you thinking of? I mean,
No, the divorce, your parents' divorce.
Okay, yeah, we did get into the divorce problem of my family, and I was affected by it, certainly. And luckily it happened when I was very young, and so I could get over it all. But this is something that probably every family, well, most families, in some way or another, have problems like this, or maybe not like this, but some problem or the other, which they get over. And maybe my love of nature and my love of getting out into the wild was my sanctuary, so to speak, and that's how I did it.
Which leads me to the question, what does nature mean to both of you? Because I came to nature very late in life, but you two guys had the opportunity and the luck to find nature very early in life. So what do you get out of it?
Go ahead. I can't answer that except that it came so naturally to me. And again, going back to my strange mother, I grew up in a place in New York State. Now, when you think of New York, you think of the big city, New York City, the Big Apple and all that. But hey, man, I was out way up near the Vermont border, a very wild place. And I had an aunt who was a commercial artist, quite wealthy because she had this ancient house and 40 acres of land next to a forest. And I was there not going to school, can you imagine? And just having a great time fishing, turning over rocks, finding snakes and bugs. And man, I was just the luckiest kid in the world. And that's how it all started. If I had started out in a city, well, I might still be living in a city, which I'm not, thank God. But yeah, that's how it started.
Wow. I think my story is very similar in many ways. I too had very unconventional parents. My father's actually here with us today, and I think they are weird in many ways than one. And one of the weird ways in which they parented me was by taking me to wild spaces, simply because that's something that they were interested in. And seeing that this was something that I was passionate about, they moved me to a boarding school called Rishi Valley, which is nested in a forested valley in Andhra Pradesh. And so I did my schooling next to wildlife. I had to regularly toss out snakes and frogs and scorpions from the hostel. I remember so many times friends coming and telling me, Ishan, there's a frog in the bathroom again. and I would be the one to catch it and take it out. And so I think growing up, waking up not to alarm calls but to peacocks calling from the nearby hillside is something that had an effect on me. So to your question of what is nature to me, I think in many ways nature is a feeling, which is I think a philosophical way of looking at it, but I'll explain. I think I like myself the best when I am in a natural space, and I think that's how I would define my relationship with nature.
Yeah.
What was it? Oh, yeah. So you talk in your book about not fitting in, and that's another, I guess, reason you turned to nature and you went into the wilderness. But it occurred to me that would have marked you as more of a misfit. You would have been the one person in your peer group with completely different interests. So did it help you fit in, or were you the cool dude?
I can certainly say I'm the cool dude now. But I was definitely the guy who had something not quite right, up here. I can tell you, I mean, even with my teachers. So for instance, and this is something that I talk to students a lot, they often ask, Ishan, did you get bitten by a snake? And that was the first snake that bit me was a common bronzeback, which is a non-venomous snake. And I tell this to just say that my warden in the hostel where I was bitten looked at me and she said, Ishan, just get out, get out. I cannot deal with someone like you. You are just too different. I remember every teacher at school, in fact, coming to the hospital because they sent me to the hospital for a bronzeback tree snake bite, which is like a tooth, like it's like getting stung by a thorn. And I think every teacher took time out of their day to come and scold me for putting them in that position. So I will say that yes, I have felt like I'm an outsider, and I think that's also partly why I love snakes. It's not only because because of him. A lot of why I'm interested in snakes is because of the gentleman we have sitting over here, but also because honestly, give him a round of applause. Honestly, like he deserves it. But also because I think snakes are some of the most misunderstood animals on the planet, and I think everyone in this room in some way can relate to that feeling of being misunderstood. And so yes, I felt like I was misunderstood and different because of this inclination to nature, and I just decided to lean into it.
And what about you? You were also a maverick in school, not fitting in. You were the one bunking classes, going out on weekends.
That's putting it really mildly. I'm not going to go into too much of the details, but well, the school yearbook, for example, and the last, unfortunately I don't have it here with me, but the quotation was something about this Rom boy, or they used to call me Breezy, that was my nickname, doesn't like our social events very much. He'd much rather be out there with the wild, and if you see him walking around, there's inevitably a parrot on his shoulder, and and he even keeps a python under his bed. And how weird can you get?
So, do you think you are who you are because of all the adults who enabled you? They allowed him to keep an air rifle, a python. He would go out alone on weekends, camping, which was totally against the rules.
Yes, in a matter of fact, well, this was another generation. This is quite a few years ago. We're talking about the 1950s, if you can believe it. But sitting here, it's kind of hard for me to believe, too. But yes, they did. I was enabled. I brought back a Russell's Viper from Belgium Lake in the Palni Hills. Those of you who know Kodaikanal know Belgium Lake very well. And it was strange to find a Russell's Viper way up there at 7,000 feet. And I brought it back in my lunchbox to the science lab. And we had a biology teacher. And he was amazed. He wasn't he didn't scold me or anything like that. He said, "Great, we'll just keep it in an aquarium here and let everyone see it." I mean, besides having a strange mother, can you imagine having a biology teacher who would actually encourage? This is the most dangerous snake in the world, literally, a Russell's Viper. Wow.
But that sounds great, like a teacher who enables you, but you didn't like school very much.
Yeah, well, aside from that, I didn't like school very much. And, well, I didn't do very well in school either. You'll read that, for example, They made me graduate. I didn't have enough credits, so they made me take typewriting and general science, which was a 9th grade subject in 12th grade. They tried every single ruse to get rid of this weird kid. Well, I did graduate from high school, and I went to college for a whole year.
What about you, Ishan? Who are your mentors? Who helped you become where you are today?
I think most of my mentors don't even know they're my mentors. Like I grew up reading, books on nature and wildlife. So Valmik Thapar, who we recently lost a few months ago, Ullas Karant, even photographers like Franz Lanting, Bobby Nobis, and there are just so many names, AJT Johnson. These are people who had written about wild India, especially at a time when I didn't exist. And these books in many ways have shaped who I am. I will say once I went to this boarding school, I did have a few teachers. Like we had this one geography teacher, but that was just his title. He's actually one of India's leading ornithologists. His name is V. Shantaram, and he took students, whoever wanted to join him, he took students every Sunday to just go birdwatching in the nearby forest. And so he is one among many who mentored me. In fact, my English teacher and my maths teacher were the resident snake rescuers of the campus. And so, I've been told many times, Ishan, let them do the snake rescuing. But what we would do is that my English teacher would catch, say, a checkered keelback, which is this particular snake, and then we would go to her house, and then she would allow me to handle it while serving me hot chocolate. And so, yeah, I've had a few teachers who have really shaped who I am. Even now in college, Mahesh Rangarajan, who is another prominent environmental historian. So yeah, a few, but more so books.
Really good.
So both of you went to boarding school that was set near forests. So that also seems to have played a key role in your career development. Did it?
When I read his book, like sitting in the back of the class. Sitting in the back of the class is a standard for kids like us, kids when we were kids, because you're out of the milieu of being serious students, but also there's a window nearby and you're looking outside, wondering what's going on, listening to the bird sounds, and in his case he actually jumps out of the window and catches a snake. I mean, what? So yes, there's quite a few similarities here.
On that point though, I do have to say, I think living next to nature, and I'm curious to know how it was for you. I think it, especially at that young age, I think it has some sort of psychological effect on you. I think, for instance, I hear a lot of people talking about conservation today and saying, these forest guards and those out there in the field, they're not really doing anything. But when you actually live in a place like that and see how difficult the terrain is and how difficult life is in that landscape, you I think, gain a greater respect for those out there on the field. And so I think, at least that's something that has profoundly impacted me. I'm sure even in Kodaikanal, just living in that landscape and knowing what life is like at that landscape influenced your conservation journey later down the line.
So besides your wild escapades, you also talk about music a lot in your book. What role does why is it important to you, and why do you have this extensive list listed by decade at the end of the book?
Yeah, I mean, to misquote Jimi Hendrix, music and nature are my religion, and it's something about music that brings your emotions out. There's something about music you can find sanctuary in when you're having a hard time, or someone around you is having a hard time, or the world is having a hard time. And I always go back to music. I just remember our days in, again, something you can read about. I was in the US Army, of all things. And during the Vietnam conflict, I was a medical lab technician. I wasn't a shooter or a killer of Vietnamese people, thank God. And as a lab technician, you have to sit in front of a microscope and do countless blood counts, whole blood counts, which went on for hours and hours every day. One thing we did have, though, is we blasted rock and roll music all day long in that lab. I mean, the senior officers would come in shut that music off. And so as soon as, once they were there, we'd shut it off. And as soon as they left, they'd bang it right back on again. Elvis Presley, whoever was going at the time. So music has always been something, and still is, something that keeps me going. It's wonderful.
Do you have any interest like that, Ishan? Do you draw sustenance from any other interest besides wildlife?
It's funny, I think wildlife finds a way to creep into all my other interests. For instance, drawing, that's something that I just like because I guess this is how inspiration strikes my generation. I found a YouTube video of someone drawing something when I was very young, when I was allowed to use the computer, and I think I began drawing, and now I draw wildlife. My dad was a passionate photographer, and one day I picked up the camera, and now I photograph wildlife. And so I think those two are the interests I'll highlight.
And you also blog a lot.
Yeah, and I write about wildlife. Yeah.
Okay, so you said when we were preparing for the session outside, you said that you give talks to schools and encourage students to follow wildlife and go out in nature. Do you think that this an interest in nature will necessarily translate to feeling, doing something for conservation?
I certainly hope so. I think, especially with the students we've been speaking to, I found that while they are very passionate, they're very curious individuals, they don't really know about the wildlife living in their own backyards. A lot of them, like when I ask them to identify animals on the screen, and I know we have some students here from the schools I spoke at yesterday. A lot of them tell me, a lot of them say creatures that actually, so I show them a snake, and they're like, oh, boomslang, oh, black mamba, oh, green mamba. These are snakes that are not found on this continent. Yet people say these names, and I realized that people don't even know about their local wildlife. And so I think, do I think it'll translate into something on the ground? I can only say that I certainly hope so.
Yeah, but it introduces me to myself.
We have done half an hour. Are there questions or? No, wait, don't worry. Do we have any questions? Could we get a mic to the audience? And in the meantime, Ishan, could you read us a section from your book, please?
Sure, we can do that. Should we take Sir's question first?
No, let them get the mic.
Okay, so this is a section. I don't think you'll all like me after this, but I will read it anyway.
Yeah, that's all it says.
Romulus, how many times were you bitten? Was it okay? And said, did you really open it to get away from it?
You gotta read this, man.
Hello? Yeah, all right. So, this section of the book, for context, I was in a place called Agumbe, something I know both of you are very familiar with, and I had heard someone cutting a tree down, all right? The sound of someone cutting wood. And when I heard that, I was so shocked, and so I asked, the person I was volunteering under, what's that sound? And he tells me, Ishan, no one is cutting trees. That sound is the sound of a leopard. All right? And so this is me now going and investigating. So that's the context, all right? Yeah. I decided to head out for a morning stroll along one of the trails. As I walked, I secretly hoped I'd catch a glimpse of the leopard. I knew the chances of spotting the cat was slim, yet I kept a keen eye out for the predator. The songs of insects merged with its calls as the station vanished behind me. Soon I realized it was futile to search for the spotted cat. I gave up my search and aimlessly wandered about, soaking in the jungle morning. A robin hopped into the bushes while a woodpecker rammed its beak into a nearby tree. Dust swirled in the strange light that waltzed through the canopy. The atmosphere was idyllic, everything calm and serene. But then, something was off. My neck tingled with an unseen fear. Suddenly, I had the distinct feeling of being watched. Whoa, right? Yeah. In the wild, your gut instinct is your most valuable asset, an ancient and never failing impulse. It might appear irrational and baseless, but it is genuine and can spell the difference between life and death. Heartbeats hammered louder, and a sudden foreboding overcame me. Prompted by some instinct, I knew things would go wrong before they did. At once, there was a deafening sound to my left. Something massive was blundering through the forest. A screaming cloud of miners erupted from the treetops. The thunderous sound of the creature trampling through the bush indicated that it wasn't a leopard. It was something larger and infinitely more dangerous. As for what happens next, read the book to find out.
Okay, the question there.
Good afternoon. This is an inevitable question, and it's to Mr. Whitaker, mainly because of his white hair and mine. Every conversation about nature today is between conservation and development. And, to quote George Bush, if you're not with us, you're against us. So each side does not come into the middle and meet each other. Human beings are also part of nature, and I suppose we're also part of the planet, right? How do you think we can resolve this conflict between conservation and development?
Boy, oh boy. Can you meet me afterwards and we'll have a session? That's an incredibly pertinent question, and it's not something we're going to solve at this dais or something like that. But there is a way, and I have to put it in the hands of our government, which I'm not going to say too much about because I don't want to get arrested. But we really have to show them the way if we can. And those of us who have been working in conservation, who have some sort of clout or name, or made a name for ourselves, have to make it pretty clear that this is not to be done. When there are protests against a highway going through a national park, or stopping a highway from daytime traffic, for nighttime traffic in particular, these things have to be observed. They have to be, and this is how people like Valmik Thapar, who was just mentioned, the late Valmik Thapar, spent his life doing it. And it's up to these courageous people to keep going and keep making it a very strong noise about it. That's all I can say.
Do we have any other question? Okay, mic there, please, whoever is doing the mic. And do you want to read another section from the book in the meantime?
I have a question
Could you
for
just
Ishan.
wait, please. We'll do this reading and then we will take your question. Okay, the year is 1960. Rom is 16 years old in Mysore. His mother thinks he's too young to go to college in the US, so he's got 1 year to do something. And he is apprenticing with the Pradhanyas, who were a famous taxidermy studio in Mysore at that time.
I also met someone called Reverend Brother Romulus. Imagine, out in Talabadi, which was not far from Chamarajnagar, exactly. And my favorite times always began with Brother Romulus saying, "Take the shotgun and go with Charles and bring us back a deer or black buck." Charles and I rode along village dirt roads on my Triumph, my old motorcycle. When we spotted black buck grazing in a field, we stalked them, hiding behind bushes and trees. We would try to creep within 60 feet of the antelope before taking a shot. One time, the air burst with the loud calls of red-wattled lapwings. "Did you do it? Did you do it?" The suddenness of their warning startled me, and before I could collect my wits and aim, the alert black buck sprinted away. I cursed the birds, as I would in later years, when they prevented us from getting too close to crocodiles and gharials to take pictures. But these plovers worked in my favor once when a pair screamed and dive-bombed a beautiful 10-foot python in tall grass that I wouldn't never have spotted on my own. Sometimes Charles and I hitched rides on bullock carts. Not only did they save us the exertion of walking, but they also hid our approach from the antelopes. Since the animals saw and heard the noisy wagons with huge wooden wheels every day, they continued grazing unperturbed. Hiding behind a cart, we edged toward a small group of black buck feeding in a fallow field one afternoon. When we were within about 60 feet, I tapped the driver's leg to stop, held the shotgun tight against my shoulder, clicked off the safety, and fired at the shoulder of a big male with a magnificent set of spiral horns. The animal dropped where he stood, kicked up the dirt, and then lay still as the females scattered. We picked up the dead animal and convinced the cart driver to take us back to the parked motorcycle.
I have a question for Ishan. We met yesterday. So the question is, did your perspective on humans change after spending so much time with the wild? And after writing your book, did anything change in your daily life?
I'll tackle the first one. Did my perspective on humans change? I think on some humans. I think I grew. I respected those out there living on the front lines a lot more. Once I, of course, went through the experiences that I wrote about, and then again reflecting back on that while I wrote the book. Those on the front lines. Again, this is something that I do even at the schools that we were talking about. I try to tell students that, listen, all of us, and even all of us in this room, are some of the most privileged people on the planet. We are living in such, right now we're all seated in such a fancy hall with these fancy lights and air conditioning and everything, but those out there, they are the real heroes, the forest guards and, and who all, in conservationists and so on, with their boots dirty, who are doing work on the ground. And so I think my respect for them really grew, because you see what a hard life this is, and what great work they're doing to change the course of history. So that's that. And your second question as to, could you repeat the second question?
What changed in your daily life after writing the book?
I think this is a question that every author, I would like to hear other authors' experiences on, because I thought that once I write the book, life would be different, but when I woke up, the sun still rose in the east. I was still as sleepy, and when I looked in the mirror, I wasn't as handsome as I thought I would be afterwards. I thought the world would change, but I think it takes maybe 20 or 30 books to do that, and I think we'll get there. Maybe it doesn't, yeah, maybe it doesn't. No, but I will say, I'm just prouder of myself for having written a book at 21. But apart from that, I think life is still the same. Thank you. Good, lovely question.
Another question? Arun in the front here. Okay, in the meantime, by the time the mic comes there, I wanted to ask you about that section you read. Hunting is controversial today, but it was the way of life at that time in the 1960s. But it's also the oldest way humans learned natural history. Like, if you look at the Irulas with whom you work for such a long time, they are such amazing trackers because they were hunters. And even BNHS, the Bombay Natural History Society, for decades relied on hunting communities to catch birds for their scientific studies. So with the ban on hunting, do you think we are in danger of losing that vast knowledge, indigenous knowledge? And what is that going to cost us?
We're certainly losing it, because the children of the Irla colleagues of mine, whom we started the Irla Snake Catchers Cooperative Society, which produces most of the venom for the production of life-saving antivenom. These people are fantastic. And their sons do not want to catch snakes. They want to join the mainstream. They don't want to be have the stigma of being, tribals who dig in the ground and catch snakes. It's funny to them that I'm glorifying this knowledge of theirs, but the great birdman of India, Salim Ali, we used to have interesting conversations about how a babbler or something tasted in the pot after he shot it and skinned the bird. These are scientists who are hunters, and probably the best book to look at is one called The Repentant Butchers.
Penitent butchers.
Pardon? Penitent, the Penitent Butchers by Sir Peter Scott and Richard Fitter, back when they started something called the Fauna and Flora Preservation Society, one of the oldest environmental NGOs in the world. So hunting was definitely in, and it was definitely the beginning of conservation. Let's look at it that way. The little episode I just read was from 60 years ago. Am I that old? God.
And what does it make you feel when you read that? Sorry, this is something that has been nagging me for a while, and I get a chance to ask you these questions. So how does it make you feel now when you read it? Do you feel that prick of guilt?
Those of us who are non-vegetarians, am I going to ask if hands up or something like that? No, I won't. But anyway, we're all guilty of it in a way. And I believe that hunting is a sustainable, if it's a sustainable practice, is still something which can happen. And it does happen in many parts of the world where wildlife is being well looked after. In India, it doesn't happen. It's totally banned. I don't feel guilty about it because in those days it was a happening thing. But I have to admit that I wasn't looking at it with my eyes wide open. There was just not enough wildlife left. There was not enough wild habitat left. And things were going downhill. And thank God for the Wildlife Act, and thank God for the strong conservation ethic that we have developed in these last 60 years. But that black buck tasted mighty good.
Arun.
So guys, I have a question for all of you actually. Recently I read Ravi Chalam's obituary of Valmik Thapar. It's very interesting. And he said that we stood opposed on the very important issue of the Forest Rights Act. So should people who've lived in the forests for millennia, the tribals, be evicted? And Valmik was saying we need core areas. If they are there, they have to be shifted out. And Ravi Chalam's argument was saying no, they need to be respected, the rights need to be respected. So obviously it's a divide that I see continuing today in the conservation community. The implementation of the FRA and what it is, what it means. So I'd like your respective takes on this very contentious topic. Yeah?
That's Janaki all the way.
Okay.
Right, put me on the spot.
She's a toughie.
Well, my personal opinion is that these people have lived with wildlife, and there is still wildlife around them, and instead of celebrating them and rewarding them, you're punishing them by destroying their whole way of life, transplanting them to a completely different place where they don't have the support system. So that's a fundamental injustice of what's happening. And I think more and more that we talk about human-wildlife conflict, like all around Mysore, for instance, we are talking about leopards coming into human areas and they're just being caught and moved. We need to learn how to live with wildlife, and these are the people to teach us. And this is a lesson that the countries we look up to in the conservation world, like our entire model of wildlife conservation is copied from the West. And they are now struggling to figure out how to live with wolves and bears, and there are these big, I mean, if a wolf kills a sheep, it's shot dead. We don't do that here. Here it has to kill a human. That's the value we place on wildlife. So we have something to teach the world, and we are destroying it. That's my personal feeling.
It's complex. It's really complex.
One last question. Continuing on what you said, Janaki, we are seeing, due to perhaps the efforts of conservation over the last 3-4 decades, that the number of especially the larger animals like the elephants and tigers, leopards have increased substantially, I would say. Every year we have a couple of years we have the census, and it shows good numbers all the time. But on the other hand, the habitat is not increasing. The numbers of the wildlife are increasing, which leads to a potential for more and more conflict. And as Ishan rightly put it, the people who stay at the edge of the forest are the frontline warriors who keep facing this. So just to give you an example of the 5 tigers which were recently poisoned in Hills, I say this is because of an inherent systemic deficit. I would like to know from the panel here, how are we going to address this? Is only going to increase because conservation on the one hand is going gung-ho, and the other hand, there's no increase in habitat. If at all it shrinks, right? Sorry? Yeah, so your opinion, please.
It's the same old question of conservation versus development, right? It's a very naughty thing. I mean, it's an unanswerable question in a session with 1 minute to go. Sorry. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you get your lunch now. Or, oh, okay, Shubha's cueing me my lines. Please. This is the book, these are the books we were talking about. Please go and buy a copy and get it autographed by these two gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.